Sentencing is a very important hearing in the criminal justice process. In terms of the life of a case, it's normally at the very end of the case. This would be after there's been either a plea on behalf of a defendant or a conviction after jury trial of some type. Sentencing hearings can be very different depending upon what happened leading up to the sentencing hearing. In terms of if it's an agreed upon plea of some type, it will be more certain what's going to happen. Sometimes it might be a stipulated sentence where both the prosecution and the defense have already agreed on a very exact sentence, and at the hearing the judge simply is indicating whether or not they will go along with and agree with that particular sentence. Other times the sentencing hearing can be very contested, and maybe it's after a jury trial, or maybe it's what's called an open plea, where there's a real big range where a defendant going into a sentencing hearing might get probation, or they might be going to prison for a certain amount of time. Or it could be a range where the defendant knows they're going to be going to prison, but they're hoping it's for a lower term and not a more aggravated, higher number in prison. In those kinds of situations, the sentencing hearing can be very contested, and the prosecutor might be arguing certain factors in aggravation. Maybe they're about the case that took place, maybe they're about the defendant, and they're saying there's certain things about the defendant's past or their priors. Maybe they're arguing that the offenses are getting more serious or escalating or becoming more numerous. Maybe they would try to point out things such as a defendant had a prior opportunity on probation and didn't do well. Maybe they would argue things such as in the case in front of the judge, it involved a crime of violence, or there were victims who got hurt because of the defendant's actions. All of those would be factors the prosecution could use to try to support an argument that the defendant should get a higher term in prison. On the other hand, a criminal defense attorney would be able to point out factors in mitigation. They'd be able to argue things about the case that maybe showed it wasn't as serious as cases that were in the same class of crimes or similar offenses. Maybe they would point out things about the defendant to show he or she was a youthful offender. Maybe they hadn't really gotten a meaningful opportunity to go through rehabilitation, or maybe there was an underlying substance abuse issue that was the root cause of why this offense took place, and propose alternatives to incarceration. Ultimately, in these sentencing hearings, a judge has a lot of discretion. While there are guidelines within the law that usually provide a certain range where certain types of offenses and individuals should get a particular sentence, the judge is given a lot of discretion as to ultimately what is the correct sentence for a particular individual. Appeals are a process that takes place after the sentencing. So after a sentencing hearing, a defendant has the right to file an appeal. That has to be done within 60 days of the sentence, otherwise that right to appeal can be lost. There are specialists that handle appeals on criminal cases. Depending upon whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony, everything can be appealed from some of the circumstances that may have taken place in a conviction. If a defendant felt evidence was admitted during the course of a trial that should not have been admitted for some kind of legal defect or reason, and the judge overruled their objection at trial, admitted the evidence, then later on that could be the basis for an appeal. It's very common for later on for legal issues an appellate court to review that and to find something was done that was not correct. Maybe as it relates to the conviction itself, or maybe the sentence that was imposed was inappropriate under the circumstances. In those cases, in that situation, an appellate court can reverse and undo a conviction or send it back to be resentenced if there was an error in sentencing, and basically tell the trial court to go back and fix it. Or in other cases, they can overturn the conviction altogether and say that a defendant is entitled to a new trial.